Welcome to Culmination, where we're not experts, but we sure have a lot to say. In the process of becoming our best self, I have with me the aspiring philosopher Kevin Kim to discuss status. And with that, let's get started. So, Kevin, what is status in your own words?
Well, I think status has different meanings, but I guess in the context of our conversation today, I think we're mostly talking about social status, and I think that relates to two things, and I think that's how you see yourself amongst a group of people, and how you would like to see yourself, and how
Mm.
they see you amongst a group of people. Yeah.
So it's kind of like here I am now, objectively, and
hmm
here I am in terms of like a dream or ambition.
Yeah, I think that's generally what people think about when they see like the word status.
So how, if you will, how is that applicable to you?
Well, I think that for me, I've never really thought about status in a objective sense. Like I've never thought about how I stand amongst a group of people, and I've never really considered how I can improve my standing within a group of people.
Mhm.
But I understand like the applications and need for status because like as people, we generally tend to like group ourselves together. We generally tend to I guess place ourselves amongst people that we can generally interact well with and do things with. And I think with that comes like a sense of like a growing community and you're trying to find your role within it. I think that's what status is.
Mm. So just like fitting in with a group, right?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a hierarchy sense to it?
I think in a lot of ways there is. Oh,
And do you
should
want
I,
to, yeah,
yeah,
do you
should I
want
elaborate?
to,
Yeah. So I think that like I don't want to drop like the society word, but I think today in the world today, we
hmm
see like even in the corporate structures, we have like managers and then their bosses and their bosses all the way to like the CEO to the
yeah.
general worker. I think this idea of like you work for someone else and you work for someone else, it's like you have your own position and your own role, but you're still within this like big corporate structure. I think that's
hmm
reflected a lot even within the relationships that we see today. Right? Like we know that the necessity of status exists because even if we go to school, right? Like the general like the respect that we have for our teachers,
Yes.
it comes from their role as like our administrators or like them being older than us. But I think
hmm
primarily it comes from the fact that they are set in a position to teach us something. I think that status in itself is a very important role and a factor in determining how you place yourself within like the academic setting too.
Mm. So that begs the question, how would you differentiate status and authority? Because they sound pretty similar.
I think that I think they are very similar things, but I think what's differs status and authority is authority almost conveys like a will or like a an ability to do something. Like if you have but status, for example, is just how you are within a social standing. So like authority, right? If you give someone the authority to do something, then they have the power to do that thing. But if someone is in a given status, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the power to do anything within that standing. And I think
Okay.
that's a differentiating factor.
Is it almost like a respect thing too?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, so it's not like general. So it's almost like somebody with authority and someone with high status can almost be at the same level,
hmm
but one actually has power to do something and one is just seen as higher?
Yeah,
Question
well,
mark?
I think the differentiating factor is also like authority seems to be a lot more objective, right? Like, we wouldn't say that our bosses, if we have a job, we wouldn't say our bosses have a social standing or
Yeah.
social status of being our bosses, right? No, they are just our bosses, and the structure is set that way. I would call that more authority, but I think what status is almost like a combination between a subjective and objective view of how you see yourself and how they see you within a group of people. Like, it's not necessarily that you have the authority, it's not necessarily that you have the power to do anything. It's just almost like a fluid sense of how you interact within a group.
Mm. You know, I just had an interesting thought pop in my head,
Hmm.
and it's a really weird thought slash question.
Hmm.
Just because status seems kind of like it sounds like a social construct. Like even though we
Hmm.
talked about how it's like a necessity, like this idea of one, I want to ask you, does status even like in an objective sense, like
Hmm.
literally, does it exist?
Uh, um,
Like does status actually exist?
well, I would say that in a lot of ways, status does exist, right? Because I think even in like tribal times, we've always set ourselves into different groups,
Mm-hmm.
and we've always fought with others for land, for food, for resources in general, right? And as a group, right, as a society, we were trying to gain a better standing with competing members of other groups, right? And that idea, I think, has transferred over now, almost like evolutionarily and as a necessity. So, in that sense, that broad idea of status definitely does exist within our interactions with other people. But
Okay.
I think that in a more individualistic sense, of how you see yourself portrayed within the group and how you think that other people see you. That idea of your own status, I did air quotes, might not necessarily exist.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like it's just in your head, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like that's a good explanation.
Mhm.
So, how is status something we all strive for?
So I I um I think that in a lot of ways, what we as like humans strive for isn't necessarily status, but it's like the idea of happiness. And I think that a lot of throughout history, a lot of different philosophies, religions, and ideas have traced back to the idea of how to, I guess, maximize happiness in the best way possible, right? Like, for
Hmm.
example, you have like early Greek hedonists who thought that you should chase as much pleasure as you can possibly, and you have the Stoics who thought that you should detach yourself, right? That the goal of life is to do your duty and to always do the right thing to the best extent as possible.
Mm.
Because in that way, it is to maximize happiness in the longevity. And that you have the Epicureans, who are another group of philosophers who thought that the goal of life was to seek pleasure and to enjoy friendships and do all the things that give you, I guess, fulfillment, right? And mixed into almost all of these different philosophies of happiness is the idea of how you stand within a group of people. Like, for example, Stoics think that it's all about the self. It's all about yourself within a society. The Epicureans thought that it was all about how you interacted with other groups of people. And the hedonists were, a lot of them were focused on the physical pleasures that you can derive with other people in the society.
Like
And
intimacy or
yeah,
what?
yeah,
Okay.
like sex
Okay.
and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. And I think that if we fast forward to now, I think that's in a lot of ways how we think about status, right? Like, we don't think about status as a means in itself. We
Hmm.
think about status as a means to gain a greater amount of happiness. Like, I think we see
Mm.
this trope a lot. Like, um, if only I can have that job, I will be happy. If only I can become a lawyer and make this amount of money, I'll be
Yeah.
happy. But that's not necessarily true. And I think that's how a lot of people think about status today.
Right, and it's kind of like K through 12 kind of gears you up to be like,
Hmm.
all right, I'm gonna go to college so I can get a really good job and
Hmm.
get a lot of money, like you just said.
Right, right.
Um, so real quick though,
Hmm.
how would you define that happiness idea? Like we're all trying to find happiness. And I mean, to
Hmm.
anyone listening to this, and myself included, it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, I get it. It's happiness. Like,
Hmm.
dude, why are you asking this stupid question? But
Hmm.
but would you mind defining it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can actually define what I guess like lifelong happiness is, but for
Yeah.
me, I think it's the idea of fulfillment, right? Like in a lot of ways, we desire things. I guess happiness correlates with fulfillment, but I think in a lot of ways we desire things because we want to feel full inside. We want to feel happy. Um, and like for example, I think evolutionarily we seek a family because it makes us complete. We've sent our genes away, and we put I guess ourselves into another thing, and in that
Mm,
way it makes us feel fulfilled. It feels like we've done a good duty, and we seek jobs that'll keep us challenged. They'll give us money. A combination of the things that'll make us feel fulfilled, like we contributed to a greater thing. And I think in
yeah.
a lot of ways, the happiness that we seek for is actually a sense of fulfillment.
Hmm. And you said that status is like a means to find this happiness.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, people think about status as a means to find this happiness. But I think that idea in itself can be like dangerous, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're saying that you have to be at a certain level in order to feel fulfilled, I think that idea is almost destructive because you always want to chase the next big thing. You always want to be like, oh, for example, if you're in a corporate job, like, oh, I'm a manager now. Oh, maybe I could be that manager's manager, or and then like you try to build your way up, but I'm not sure that you'll always feel fulfilled inside.
I can definitely see a crossroads
Hmm.
situation from something like that. Like the good thing or the good aspect of that is that you're always chasing something bigger, so you're always wanting to improve and like working on yourself, trying
Hmm.
to adapt. Like you're
Hmm.
getting to bigger and better places. But I can also see that destructive nature on the
Hmm.
other side of the coin where it's like you run into the it's never enough sort of predicament.
Right. And I think that danger only comes or usually comes when people chase status as their only means of happiness or
Mm,
their only gauge of success, because I think that fulfillment comes from balance. Like all things in life, you should keep a balance of friendships, of work, of family, of all these things. If you find balance, and if you find a balance that you're happy with, then I think in a lot of ways that'll keep you motivated, and that'll give you all the other things in life that'll make you feel fulfilled. But if you just chase status, or if you just chase a certain role in a society, I think that leads to like a destructive pattern, like you said, of chasing one thing after another.
But also, it's like if you're just chasing status, it's like
Hmm.
I almost think of like The Great Gatsby or something. Like if you want to be this guy who hosts parties every
Right.
day and they're like
Hmm.
really grand and they're always wearing suits, drinking champagne, like it's very expensive,
Hmm.
very fancy, but
Hmm.
it's like once you achieve such a feat that you've been longing for, this high status, you're like congratulations, you're now one of the elites.
Hmm.
What now?
Yeah,
Where's
I
there to
think
go?
I think that's the problem that I guess we've been talking about, is that there's in a lot of ways there's always more to go, right? Like there's always more money to make. There's always more things you can do to make an impact. There's always more and more and more, right?
Mhm.
But if we take the things that we can do as infinity, right? And if we say that we're going to be fulfilled when we reach that infinity, um, just by the nature of infinity, we can never reach it. So
Yeah.
then, in that way, we're never gonna feel fulfilled. So then, I think, and if we take this analogy to a literal sense, right? Like, I don't think you can say that Bill Gates necessarily feels fulfilled, or Jeff Bezos, or any of these top CEOs, right?
Hmm.
Like I don't wanna intrude on their lives, but like a lot of these CEOs are like they're getting divorces, or like they're losing a lot of their fortune. Like clearly something is this all this money isn't the secret to making them truly feel happy and fulfilled on the inside, you know?
Right. And also after you mentioned people like that,
Hmm.
it's also another interesting talking point of this kind of idea that we all run into at points, which is almost where envy comes in. But it's
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
you look at someone like Jeff Bezos in 2021 and you
Hmm.
see a man with like infinite money and
Right.
like a fantastic business that is better than many others, and it's just a complete monopoly. But and some people are like envious, like Jeff Bezos shouldn't have all that money. Like I want that money, like
Hmm.
all of these different like envious things that we might start thinking about. But
Hmm.
also, if you think about it, Jeff Bezos didn't start out like that.
Right.
And I'm saying, let me just say a disclaimer, like I'm kind of using him as an example, but it's not like specifically him, but just
Right.
in a general sense, anyone who's successful. It's like you have to think back to where they started. Like a lot of times we don't see the behind the scenes. We never see the people who climb that way to the top. But when they're
Hmm.
at the top, all you see is that. It's
Yeah,
kind of like the reverse of what we've been talking about.
I also think that when you portray yourself, right, like there's a lot of metaphors throughout history that say that you're putting on a mask for people.
Hmm.
And if you choose the mask that you wear, you're not gonna choose like a frowning face, you're gonna choose a happy one. You're gonna put your best foot forward to the people that you know.
Yeah.
So then to the other people looking in, you're not seeing the bad, I guess, in you're not seeing the bad sides. You're not seeing their unhappiness, you're not seeing their like unfulfillment. You're seeing what they put out as the good, the happy. And I think that also ties into the dangers, I guess, in this modern era of like social media, right? Like you're not gonna post for example, on Instagram, you're not gonna post a picture of you being all sad and be like, I today was a really tough day. Like
I
I
mean,
got an F
some
on my
people do.
calculus test. Like I don't think that's what people necessarily do. So then I think when others try to interpret people's lives, they see only the good and they miss the like you said, they miss all the journey and all the bad that they went through.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example, like just social media and all that.
Hmm.
Um, and in that sense, it's kind of like it's all just a popularity thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Um,
think
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
I think that the environment that we live in, it kind of drives us to chase that, right? Like it drives us to chase more followers on Instagram. It drives us to chase more friends. Like I think I think that in a lot of ways we've subconsciously associated popularity and status and things of that nature with the idea of happiness and with the idea of fulfillment, but that like we said again and again, I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah, and it is interesting how things like social media kind of change the game. Because
Hmm.
it's like if you think about the 80s or something where
Hmm.
you didn't really have all this technology, so you had to like hang out with all of your friends. You met your friends when they were in your school classes. And unless they were like your best friends who you called or hung out with, people just kind of go away. And you never, like after high school, you never see these people again. Like there's no like follow me on Instagram to keep up with what I'm doing. Like that's it.
Hmm.
Um, and in a sense, it was like everybody you knew, all your friends were more like, it was a more dense number.
Right.
But with social media, it's like it's almost inflated where because you see a number, like a specific number saying like this is how many followers you have, you start to forget that these are people and just start caring about the status component. It's like I really want that number to go up. And it's really weird how our brains like we started out using this thing so we could connect with friends, but now it seems like all we care about is just being popular on this site.
Hmm. And I mean, I think that's one of the things like that's inevitable is that we chase things that make us like feel instantly happy. It's the
Mm.
reason why a lot of people do drugs. It's the reason that like people like chocolate. It's the reason that people want Instagram followers. It's that it releases dopamine. But
Hmm.
like this dopamine as a chemical, it's only instantaneous, right? Like it
Yeah.
goes away. And I think that a lot of things that are a main problem that I see with I guess people growing up having gone through the K to 12 program is that I think that our education system is very old in comparison to the modern era, right? Like you just said, compared to the 80s, there's so many different things that kids have to um, navigate through that they just didn't have to 20 years ago, right? Like with the advent of the internet, you can connect with people all over the world. You can meet the people that you're going to potentially go to school with, even if they're on the other side of the globe.
Yeah.
And with that like navigation technique, there comes a lot of mishaps that people go through. But I don't think our school system in general is prepared to help like deal with the kids who maybe don't have such a good time navigating through. It's almost like a free for all where you have to figure it out, otherwise you're just like screwed. And I
Mm,
think that there
yeah.
needs to be reform and there needs to be necessary change in order for to I guess to help navigate the people who are growing up to better be in the world where this is the new reality. Yeah.
So I I just want to make sure I understand what you're talking about exactly. So do you mean like it needs to do a better job at helping the kids who aren't proficient at social media or something because it's almost like they become forgotten about?
I think what I'm saying is that like there are a lot of challenges, right, that come with this advent of social media, right? Like in the 80s, tying back to our talk of status, in the 80s, the literal pattern that most people took was you go to high school, right, and then you graduate, and then you go to college. You go to college so that you can get a job, and you get a job so that you can support your family, and you support your family, you have kids, and then it's like they have basically their entire life mapped out, all the way to their like retirement plan when they're like 70.
Yeah.
And I think that that idea in itself doesn't really work anymore. That of course, like it's there's nothing wrong with like wanting to go to college, wanting to get a job, good job, supporting your family, living like retiring at 70. That's completely an acceptable form, even today. But I think there's a lot of different paths that people see is possible, and I think that's also with the rise of social media, or like you see
Would you
all of
mind
these.
explaining those paths?
Yeah, so like I think there's a lot of unconventional paths that's possible. Like for example, um I guess this is like a very prominent example, but like and it's a rare example, but for
Yeah.
example, you could be a YouTuber, right? And you could make so much money doing something that would have that you didn't need a college education for. Or another thing, like I know because I'm a climber, I see a lot of like different things about how people are buying vans and reforming that so that they can live like not tethered to a house, so that they'll save income and things like that. And you don't need
Mm.
a college education to pursue these different paths.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the rise of social media and with the rise of like the sharing culture, you do see a lot of different ways that you can take in order to find find success or find like status within your community. But I think what I meant by helping people navigate that is that as kids, we don't understand, like as kids, we don't understand how to use the resources that we have in order to make like change or make a difference. Like I guess even with this podcast, right? Like you use Discord and you use Craig, the recording software, in
Yeah.
order to make the podcast. But like there's people that would have no idea how to do this, and it's not like this is taught in school. So I'm saying that there needs to be I guess a revamp in education in standard with the revamp and the growth in technology that we have in order to help kids make impacts and do things like this.
Yeah. I want to kind of throw this at you.
Hmm.
Um, just to kind of challenge the idea. I haven't really collected my thoughts yet, so it's
Hmm.
not like I agree or disagree. I'm just kind of neutral right now, but I want to challenge the idea. So I hope you're ready.
Hmm.
Um, do you think so you mentioned that there are different like paths in life, like the
Hmm.
climbers who are more almost like nomadic,
Yeah, yeah.
in a sense. I mean, that's a weird word to use, but you know, and it is really cool to see all these different paths, like just
Hmm.
kind of the spice of life, right?
Hmm.
And it kind of ties back to your philosophy that you were talking about, like with the
Hmm.
different tribes of thinking, like the Stoics and everything.
Hmm.
Um, so do you think that these paths all lead you to fulfillment? And my before you answer,
Hmm.
the kind of the tried and true, I'm doing air quotes here, like path was
Hmm.
that 80s path that you described of like, just the surefire, you go to school, you go to college, you plan retirement.
Hmm.
As that's a very traditional, almost orthodox thing now.
Hmm.
And there's a lot more exposure to different traditions and cultures nowadays. So it makes sense that there's a divergence from that original principle. That
Hmm.
is a tried and true method. It might not work for everybody, but it is a pathway kind of confirmed to give you fulfillment. So I just want to ask you, and this may be like even like a devil's advocate type thing, but do
Hmm.
you think all of these different paths, like becoming a YouTuber, becoming a nomadic climber for like all of your life, do you think the end game of that will fulfill you?
I think the dangerous thing with like setting a path and saying that it'll give you fulfillment is that there's a necessity, I think, in realizing that fulfillment doesn't come from following like a specific path. I think fulfillment for me is a certain balance, right? Whether it be a balance of your ambitions, your responsibility, and your dedication to like your friends and family and other things, or whether it be like a balance between your work, your family, and your friends, right? All these things, I think, all these different paths strive to give you that balance that you seek in life, and that I think will give you fulfillment, whatever it may be. But I think the problem with the set standard, the 80 standard that we said, is that yes, it does. It does in some ways give you a sense of what leads to fulfillment, right? But I don't think it says the main thing that I think should be iterated is that it's not that if you follow this path strictly that you'll somehow feel fulfilled and somehow feel happy in your life. Like some people don't want kids, and some
Hmm.
people don't necessarily want a big corporate job. And I think saying that, okay, you have to follow this path and you have to stay on this in order to find happiness. Those like that don't want kids, those that stray away from having a family, those that don't want a corporate job, those that don't want to follow that structure. Those
Hmm.
people, they're different. They can't find happiness. This is the only way. I think that's where it leads to problems. Because in a lot of ways, in a lot of ways, I think that we like to I guess almost evolutionarily set paths for ourselves. Like there's this step, and then there's this step, and then there's this step, and we even see that like in schooling, right? Like we have to learn this first, and in
Hmm.
order to learn this, in order to learn this, and I think it's like it's almost subconsciously rooted into our systems. But in a lot of ways, I think fulfillment in itself is also rooted into biologically rooted into who we are, right? Like we seek we seek other people because as humans we couldn't live alone. We
Yeah.
need we evolutionarily need people, and I think that's why when interacting with people does give us a sense of joy.
Hmm.
I think it also calls for the necessity of interacting with other. I forget the name of the philosopher, but he defined status, a social status, as he defines the social status of wanting to seek social status, and the rush of like a confirmation of your status as like two sides of the same coin, and an evolutionary need, right? Like you want to feel like you belong, and if people tell you that you belong, you feel that confirmation in itself gives you the this sense of pleasure and the sense of fulfillment that you need.
Is it
And
like the social contract of
yeah, yeah,
Rousseau?
yeah. Yeah, it's like the social contract, but in an individualistic sense, I think.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I think like that idea and that that communal belonging is really in a lot of ways what we strive for when we set all of these different paths.
Yeah. And you know what? I just want to tell you, I actually really agree with what you said.
Hmm.
Like, um, the main thing I took out of it was I agree that you can't just say that, oh yeah, this is a tried and true method that will without fail work.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to preface that what I meant by saying that it is tried and true and that it
Hmm.
worked
Hmm.
is kind of what I meant is that it works if you like do everything right and put in the effort and like find the balance basically. But
Hmm.
when I just said it raw,
Hmm.
obviously I didn't convey that specific message.
Yeah.
But that is what I meant. But I'm glad that you kind of broke it down a little bit because any sort of philosophy, any sort of philosophy is just like a blueprint. And what is
Hmm.
a blueprint? It's a piece of paper with drawings on it. Like it's nothing. It's actually nothing. But
Hmm.
it's up to you to take that blueprint and make it something, you know?
Hmm.
So I think, or I mean, I've seen many accounts to that method. So like the, I guess we'll call it the 80s method because we keep going back to that.
Yeah.
Like it is tried and true if you find that balance. Like you have good friends, you have good relationships with your wife and or your husband and your
Hmm.
kids
Hmm.
and everything. Like if you do it right, it's going to work. But and the other message, the other pathways, I think it's a lot more confusing to say like, oh, this works with certainty, just
Hmm.
because one, it's a lot newer, so
Hmm.
there hasn't been much data behind it. And also, it's all about your effort and everything. And it's a different ballpark, you know? Like, so many people have gone through this method that it's like, okay, here's how it works for person A, here's how it doesn't work for person B. But it's like, I don't know. I guess there hasn't been that many accounts of like the nomadic climbers who are like in a van going across Colorado or something. Like, I guess it's
Yeah.
hard to do like a full-on longitudinal study, like where
Hmm.
you study somebody's life over the course of years and everything. Um, but what do you think those would run into problems? Like you kind of broke down the problems with like the conventional, which I liked that you did that. So
Hmm.
what about the problems with this? Like the new ideas?
I think that like you mentioned, the new ideas didn't really see much because like there were, I guess, in the past, and necessarily so even now there are cases of far and few between, right? Like even with the rise in social media, there is a growth of people who want to try different paths, but they're
Hmm.
still the minority.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that we as humans haven't been able to find like we as humans desire happiness so much, but we haven't been able to find like I guess the formula, like the quote unquote formula for why,
Yeah.
is because we've been an agricultural society, like we've been self-sustaining for I think 12,000 years. But we've only it's only like a period of society of our human history where we've actually had the needs of like safety of food, of like a shelter and all these things met for a lot of Western society that
Hmm.
we think about like the other things.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy
There
of
it is.
needs.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
said
yeah,
it. I
yeah.
was like, he's gonna bring up the hierarchy of needs
Yeah, yeah. We
at a
had
moment.
the physiological needs and we had the safety needs met. So then, if we have those two needs met, then that's when we start to wonder like, how can we find the love and belonging? How can we find the esteem? How can we find the self-actualization? But obviously, like trying to find love is a lot harder than like trying to find food, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
So I think in a lot of ways that's what sparked the conversation for the last, I guess, even the last 100 years and how to better find these things. And I think that's where the alternative methods come in, right? Like if you're a climber or if you're just a nomadic person who wants to live in a van, right? You're seeking your love and belonging, your esteem and your self-actualization in places outside of I guess society, right? You're in a tight knit group of people. You're with a tight knit group of people, and you're not seeking the general status that you see out in society of like climbing the ranks of the corporate ladder and things like that.
right.
But you're seeking status within your group of like travelers or your climbers or like your hikers or whatever,
Yeah,
and you're seeking to find your love and friendship there, your esteem there, and your self-actualization of doing what you actually want to do there. And I think that's where fulfillment comes in. And I think that's what you mentioned before, like the tried and true method of the 80s. If you
the
follow
80s.
it in a lot of ways, it does give you a lot of these things, right? Like it does give you a family to give you love and belonging. It does give you a position in the corporate ladder where you can feel respected, where you can feel that esteem. But I think what a lot of people miss is that that might not be what you actually want to do. That might not be the self-actualization aspect. And
Mhm.
I think that's what leads to a lot of problems with people being fulfilled, people trying to be happy and things like that.
I think one of the things with the family idea, the quote
Hmm.
unquote 80s method, uh, is I guess this bigger focus on kind of like the stoicism, like you said,
Hmm.
the longevity, the security.
Hmm.
It's like you want to be able to be secure, live in a house, have a family. So you're safe when times get rough. Like
Right, right.
when there's all of this trouble or tragedy strikes, like you have family to turn to that is always there versus like having friends who may not be the most loyal. Like you like to
Hmm.
believe that they are, but you
Hmm.
know, family like blood is thicker than water.
Hmm.
Um and like when you grow old, it's like you have this you're settling down, you know?
Right, right.
Um and you know, it's just this idea of security like I was saying. Um but with these other ideas,
Hmm.
I think you might actually find a greater sense of fulfillment in other ways like think about the climbers for an example. I
Hmm.
actually like climbing too, so that's
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's an example that resonates with me a little bit. Like you've seen all
Hmm.
those things of like those guys online like freestyling like
Hmm.
giant cliffs, which means that they don't have a harness, so they basically are like dead if they fall.
Hmm.
And it's like you I remember asking my friend who was super into climbing who got me into it. And I just asked him this simple question of why would any idiot do that?
Hmm.
And he gave me like a serious answer and it was like one of those types of answers that you never really expected, nonetheless take it seriously, but after you
Hmm.
heard it, it was like, "Huh, you know what? I kinda respect that." He was
Hmm.
like his response was along the lines of, "When you have a harness you know that there's not actual consequences. So when you don't have a harness, like, even though it's stupid because you could literally die, that's part of the challenge. It's like they wanna prove to themselves that they can do this.
Right, right.
And with me saying that, I don't encourage anyone to do that. Like, seriously, don't do that. It's
Hmm.
very, very dangerous, and I'll stay by the fact that it's stupid, but you can still get behind it, you know? Like, if you theoretically made it through that, I bet
Hmm.
you'd feel like a god, frankly, you know?
Yeah, I think that it's like the George Mallory quote of when someone when a journalist asked him he's like dude that climbed Mount Everest. And the journalist asked him why did you do it? What was it all for? And then he was really irritated at that point. So he was like, yeah, well, I did it because I could, you know. And actually, that quote became really famous. Like we as humans, like we set all of these I guess in a ways like all these like arbitrary goals. Like there's no point in us really going to the moon, you know. There's no point in us trying to go to Mars. It's
Like,
that
there's no
we as
actual need for it.
right, like we as a society want to expand. We as a society want it's even if we even though we argued it as a need, there really is no need to go to Mars or to do anything besides like eat, sleep, and I guess reproduce. Like with those three things are a necessity for I guess the continuation of the human population.
Yeah.
But besides that, it's like everything else is almost a want. We do things because we can. I think it's almost like a testament to the human will and the human population. I think that's in a lot of ways why you see all of these free solo climbers, right?
Mhm.
They're pursuing things because they truly want to, because they can.
Yeah.
And like when you see the guy who free soloed Yosemite, Alex Honnold, when you see him climbing that 3,000 I guess feet of granite, just like pure granite, and when he gets to the top, you're amazed that anyone can do something like that. But to him, it almost seems like it to him it wasn't like he like woke up one day and decided to do it. You know, tying back to the status argument, it's like
Mhm.
he prepared years and years for that. I think he said he was trying to do that for like 8 to 9 years, which is crazy.
God.
Um,
'Cause
so
we see
then,
this man who's, like, a legend, but
right.
this man had a story, you know?
Yeah, and like you don't see all of the failures. You don't like people see him climbing Yosemite without a harness, but he's climbed Yosemite. He's climbed that it's like I think it's a 514 something route called Freerider. He's climbed that with a harness so many times to the point where he can know the route exactly. And I think in a lot of ways, if we make that a metaphor, right, like tying back to status, we see the people free climbing, right? We see the people free soloing without a harness, and we strive to be like those people doing these tasks. Um, we strive to be like those people doing these tasks dangerously, living their, I guess, quote unquote, best life,
Yeah.
and doing something that challenges, I guess, a perception of the norm. But we don't see the amount of preparation. We don't see Alex Honnold climbing with the harness in order to prepare to do something this like I guess mind blowing or something
Yeah.
this crazy. And I think that's what we should keep in mind a lot of the times when we see on social media or when we hear about things of what other people have done. It's that I truly believe that there is no difference between like economic or not economic academic status or like how smart you are or like how capable you are,
Yeah.
right? I think those are terms that like people throw around a lot, or like oh that person's smarter than me, of course they did it, or like that person's stronger than me, of course they did it, right? And maybe in a lot of ways that's true, but
Yeah.
I think we have to keep in mind the effort and all of the struggles that they went through in order to achieve a goal like that, instead of just seeing the end product.
Right, and I feel like that's a message of, like, how to stay humble and prevent, like, jealousy and envy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody has their own crap that they deal with. Everybody starts somewhere. I will mention that, like, as a disclaimer, there's always a predisposition. Like, some people are born naturally smarter than
Right,
others. Like,
right.
that's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Like, But I mean, think about even that and how that can differ for people. The people who aren't naturally smart, so maybe
Mhm,
like average 100 IQ or something, as an
mhm,
example,
mhm,
those people learn valuable skills of like working hard and having that work ethic to
mhm,
get to the level of people who didn't have to climb that hard. So these people learn valuable skills that the naturally smart people might not have. And the naturally smart people might take it for granted or might spin out of control a little bit. But also, they obviously have their own strengths. Um,
mhm.
they're naturally smart, but also they could, like, if they don't, uh, I'm stumbling on my words, but like, they can still find that work ethic too and get even higher, Like,
Yeah.
predisposition exists, but it shouldn't slow you down, it shouldn't hold you back.
I think one of the things that I really, really hate the most that we see a lot is like people tend to respect jobs, some jobs, a lot more than they respect others, right? Like, um, for example, people say, "Oh my God, becoming a doctor is so hard," and or a lawyer, it's everyone should be a doctor, everyone should be a lawyer, and then they see like a school janitor, and they're
Yeah.
"Oh, this person's a janitor because they didn't succeed at whatever they're doing." Like it's like there's such a disrespect to certain job positions. Or like even a high schooler flipping a burger at McDonald's, they're like, "Oh, you never want to flip a burger at McDonald's. You don't want to be that kid, or you don't want to be that person when you're like 20 something." But I think that in order for society to function, right? In order for people to like separate themselves from a sense of like you need to do this in order to find success, you need to find have this status in order to find success. I
Uh-huh.
think we need to strive away from the notion that some jobs are better than others, that some positions are inherently better than others. Like, just because you're a doctor doesn't necessarily mean that you're making a bigger difference than someone who's a janitor, or
Mhm.
even someone that's flipping burgers somewhere, right? And if we take the like skill analogy further, what if this doctor is really bad at cooking, right? Let's say he can't flip a burger. There's no way this man can work at McDonald's. Come on. And I think it was a far off example, but
Yeah, yeah.
I think that like there is a certain truth in knowing that people uh, people tend to gravitate towards certain things that they're good at or that they love, and that and no one should pressure them otherwise, and no one should tell them that that's a wrong thing to do. And I think it reminds me of the Einstein quote that you can't teach a fish how to climb a tree, right? Like
Mhm.
fish, you need to let the fish swim. And I think that's an important change that we need to strive for, I guess, that in society today.
So I would say that, first of all, I agreed with a lot of what you said.
Hmm.
I just kind of want to add my, really just adding on to it.
Hmm.
Um, I definitely do think that, I mean, it takes all of us to make the world go round?
Right.
Like, you need that kid flipping burgers because that's a way for them to make some decent pocket change because, they're like young and maybe they want to have fun or just keep it in their savings for a while.
Hmm.
The janitors who really make a difference cleaning up the school every day. Like we take
Right.
that so for granted?
Right.
And but also the doctors who save lives and everything. I
Right.
want to say this though, just as
Hmm.
like a sort of counter argument.
Hmm.
Although like take that lightly because I agree with a lot of what you said still.
Hmm.
I just want to like make note of the fact that becoming it's not exactly the most equitable of a comparison. Like think about becoming a doctor. Like you have to know your shit. You have to go through years and years of school. You have to go through pre-med and just like you have to go through all of these steps. It's extremely difficult and it's very there's just so much to it. And then when you're in the office, it's like this whole dread of like, what if you accidentally do something wrong and this person dies from your hands? Like all of that, all of those components.
Hmm.
And also, like not only is the job hard to get up to, I don't think it's something like mutually exclusive to certain people than others. I think anyone can really try for it. You just kind of have to want
Mhm.
it and have the endurance to go through it. So I'm not
Right.
really making that argument. I'm just saying that it is objectively a harder job than becoming a janitor. But with that said, tying this
Mhm.
back to what you're saying and basically explaining that this isn't a I'm disagreeing with you, it's actually
Mhm.
just a I want to make note of this because what you
Mhm.
said was for the most part really true and really good.
Yeah.
Like with
So,
that said,
mhm.
you got to respect the little guy.
Yeah, so I purposely picked a like super far off example because
Yeah.
what I wasn't trying to show was that like obviously it takes a lot more years of hard work and dedication in order to become a doctor or a lawyer than it is
Hmm.
to work at a like minimum wage job, right?
Yeah.
But but I think that it's the idea of respecting, not idolizing, right? Like we as
Hmm.
a society tend to idolize the jobs like doctors or lawyers, right? And we tend to say that's like the ideal that we strive for. But I don't think that that idolization is a good in society, right? Like we should respect the doctors, we should respect the lawyers that went through all this trouble to save lives, to make a difference in people's lives. But that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that that's the only way to do those things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way to do those things. And just as we put respect on the doctors and lawyers that do all these hard things, you can't
Hmm.
ignore the like you said, respecting the little guys, like the person that flips your burgers or the person that cleans up the entirety of the school. Like all these jobs deserve respect, and I think it's a dangerous thing to idolize one thing over the other.
Right, yeah. Um wait, I just had something. I think in a sense, it's
Hmm.
nice in a society to have this kind of idea of we're always striving higher. Like I don't think people should necessarily like go through high school and like strive to do something like that's an easier I don't want to say easier because it that could have its own connotations. But you know what I mean, like these quote unquote lower status jobs.
Hmm.
Um I think people should, or society's kind of good in that sense when it kind of propels you to think bigger, like doctor or lawyer. But so on that sense,
Hmm.
I think that's a good thing that society pushes, just because we should always aim high. But in the sense that I really like about your point,
Hmm.
I think it's important that we should aim high, like how I said. But if we end up not liking, like if you go to like a really impressive institution like Georgia Tech or Purdue or something for engineering, and then it turns out that you hate doing engineering or something,
Hmm.
and maybe you end up becoming a janitor someday.
Hmm.
I feel like where I resonate with your argument the most is that I don't think you should be condemned for that.
Yeah, and I think like I would like to lightly disagree in the fact that
Sure.
I don't like I think personally I I don't like having motivator factors, external motivator factors. So of course, it's a necessity to have people that you like and that you look up to, and those little motivators are I think completely okay. But having bigger societal motivators of like you striving to become one thing one day because it is the ideal, I think that's really dangerous. Like um for me, I think that the motivator should be internal, right? Like you do things and you should pursue things strictly because you just love to do them.
Hmm.
And I know in my college essay I wrote about I guess it's Camus. He was a French philosopher. His idea of absurdism. He was saying that if there is no God, right? If there is no God, then there is no inherent meaning in life, right? And that was a struggle with the nihilist to the existentialists. It
Yeah.
was like a period in philosophy, and Camus' answer was that even if there isn't an inherent meaning, right? The meaning comes from your own definition, from
Mm.
you defining it yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I really like this idea of an internal motivator, right? Like,
Yeah.
for example, with the people that climb big mountains, they do things because they love to do them.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, we should strive to learn because we love learning. We should strive to work because we love working, right? I
Hmm.
for me, the idea of like going to a 9 to 5 dead end job seems like such a miserable like existence, especially if you're not happy working those 9 to 5 hours, because
Yeah.
you're wasting so much of your life. So I think that those like external motivators of that of you should take these steps to become this thing is dangerous because it even if you spend all this time, it might not make you happy, and you can't get time back, unfortunately. So I think a way to gauge whether you're on the right path should be: are you happy with the path that you're pursuing right now? Are you
Yeah.
that you shouldn't look at the future for an evaluation of your happiness. You should only look at now, because I think like by definition, fulfillment and happiness is in the present.
Yeah. And to go off of that, I've
Hmm.
got a few points. Um, I guess I'll start with the kind of the counter argument again. Um, I think with this though, you can choose to ignore it. It's not like society's forcing you to become a doctor. I
Yeah.
do agree with you on the fact that it's like it can be intensive sometimes, but again, it's like the other thing is that it's kind of just how society works. Like as much as you might not want it, society's always going to obsess with some sort of narrative or idea, as people are always driven by a narrative, whatever that narrative may be.
Mhm.
So for one, there's always going to be an aspect of that, and two, you don't have to think of it like that. But on that note, there's another counter argument, but it's a weird one because I personally agree with you 100%.
Mhm.
I feel like I relate to you a lot in the sense that I like feeling that internal locus of control. I like
Mhm. Mhm.
doing things for me for that intrinsic motivation, that purpose, that fulfillment.
Mhm.
You know, like I'm with you, brother. Like that is I love your words. I really do.
Mhm.
They connect with me. But
Mhm.
when I think about that, here's where my third and I guess final counterpoint will go to. Not everybody's like me and you.
Mhm.
Like there's definitely people who need that push. They don't want to just learn for their own intrinsic reasons. They need some sort of guidance. And I feel like the status hierarchy in air quotes
Mhm.
may not be ideal, especially to people like you and me, because I think people like you and me are just more critical, and we're gonna find unorthodox ways through life our own ways. But I
Mhm.
think people like that, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have that sort of idea of like, okay, well, I don't really think about like some people just don't think about higher learning. I know I think about higher learning. I
Mhm.
like I'm really glad that you've talked about a lot of these philosophy things because I just find it so interesting, you know?
Mhm.
But I don't know, I guess so that's not really a counter argument in terms of me like against it. I agree with you, but I'm just trying to look at this from like an external view as well as like obviously my own personal biases.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
reason I was being so critical wasn't that I'm also with you. I'm not necessarily against the path that like the society sets up of like the external motivations. I just want to
Hmm.
like
And I
point
see what you're
out
saying.
the destructive I guess like the on the harmful ways that it could be used. And I think the reason I'm so critical is that if you grow up, I guess, in this like Western culture, it's really easy to follow that path. Like following that path doesn't take like a leap. Like you're I can't think of anyone that's like their parents would get furious if they're like, mom and dad, or whatever your parents are, I want to become a doctor. No parent is going to be like, no, you better not become a
What the
doctor,
heck?
right?
You
Like,
can't do
exactly,
that, bro.
exactly. But then I think that it's also important to say, because it does take like a leap to try to break away from that structure. And I think that's why I want to, like, I guess, reiterate that point so much. It's because that is a possibility, and that necessarily isn't something that's wrong to do. And I do agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just in the end, because we're heading close to the end of this episode.
Hmm.
I think that's just a good theme here. It's like in the end, it's your decision what you want to do. You're in the pilot's seat. You call the shots. You know what you like. You know what you want to do, and maybe you want to live the standard, secure, orthodox, quote unquote, 80s method life. And that's great, but maybe you're the type who wants to diverge from the norm. And if you can make it work and find your own fulfillment and you find meaning and passion from that, like who is anyone to strip that away from you, you know?
Hmm.
I think society and hierarchies and status, like all these words, I think it's all neutral. Like it's all neutral.
Hmm.
Whatever spin it is really up to you. Maybe you like these things. Maybe you think they're genuinely positive forces. Maybe you think they're destructive like you've said. And just to clarify, I don't think you mean like they are destructive. You just mean they can be and you are giving examples.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think I think it's just
Yeah.
like the dangers that it poses. Yeah.
And you're just offering that perspective of it.
Hmm.
Um but in the end, like you can choose to follow whatever path you want
Hmm.
because we're all just trying to find our way, and as long as you feel in control of your destiny and you're putting in the efforts to make it happen, I think more power to you, you know?
Yeah. It's kind of funny that we're talking about this because, like, um, I guess it's two things. Cause like we're so young, in
Mhm.
comparison with like how long life is. Like we've
Yeah.
only lived through, like, if we're being optimistic, a fifth of it.
Yeah.
And it seems funny for us to be like I guess state an ideal of like how we should find happiness, because we really haven't faced the reality of like bills, of family, of taking care of people like that.
Yeah.
So so it seems kind of like, I guess, obtrusive in order to do that. But also, because we're young, we can be idealistic because we do have a future we can create, and we have a
Mhm.
long way ahead of us. So I think it's like two sides of, I guess, one coin, and trying to shape your life as best as possible.
Yeah. And it's very interesting too, like just the fact that we're all young and everything, but we can always we can always paint our own destiny.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And I guess that's a perfect way to close this off. We've had a lot of great points. Kevin, you've been a stellar guest. I wanna tell you.
Thank you. Thank you. You've been a stellar host.
Thanks for coming on here, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone who's been listening. I'll see you guys next time.